Hey everyone, my name is Anand Rao, and today I'm going to be talking about the pros and cons of doing a postdoc. I know that I'm a little bit early, just getting live right now so that people can join in as you get the announcements. Um, so we'll just wait. Let's see. Right now, it just turned 10 o'clock. We'll wait like another 30 seconds and I'll get started. Thanks for joining, guys. Hey there. So, in the meantime, I will talk a little bit about myself. Hey, my name is Anand Rao. I'm a second-year postdoctoral researcher here at Stanford University, and I did my PhD training at Drexel University College of Medicine. That's in Philadelphia, and what you're going to find is that a smaller private institution like Drexel University has pros and cons, just like a big institution like Stanford University for a postdoc has pros and cons. And so today I'm not only going to talk about, what is great about doing a postdoctoral fellowship, but also the very real drawbacks of doing one. And so I'm just going to dive right in here. And if you have any questions at any point, just let me know and we can talk about your particular question and I'll answer them. So let's start with your PhD. First of all, let me just say, if you're currently in a PhD or if you've completed one, congratulations. That's a huge accomplishment. You've already set yourself apart by becoming one of the premier top individuals. Very few people end up going that far and getting their PhD, so that's really cool. The question is then, what do you do afterwards? It's a really, really tough question to answer. Every year, anywhere from 55,000 to, hi there, anywhere from 55 to 60,000 individuals get their PhD in the US alone. That's not even to count the international PhDs that are awarded. And of course, a large percentage of these individuals originally want to go into academia. They say, I really love the research process, I love the intellectual freedom, and so going into your PhD, you say, I want to become a tenure-track faculty professor or tenure-track faculty, just like my mentor is. But what the data shows is that actually by the time you become a senior PhD, your priorities shift and you suddenly realize, maybe I don't want to go into academia. There are so many different options. And I realized that, relentless grant writing or perhaps maybe the teaching workload that comes with being a professor is not for you. And so what do? Is a postdoc still necessary? Well, for starters, I think it's really important in your PhD to be strategic. And what I mean by this is there are resources out there that can help guide your decision making when it comes to your career. A PhD is very, very versatile. What it teaches you is critical thinking, right? I mean, you may be working on cancer or malaria or in engineering or psychology or the humanities, but one common thread across all PhDs is that you're solving problems that have never really been addressed before. You're creating new content, you're innovating. And that's a really, really valuable skill set that can be used in a bunch of different industry sectors, whether it's science communication or medical writing, industry, academia, so many different things. And so the first thing I would recommend that you do is there's a website, and I'll put all of this in a spreadsheet, and I've created a bunch of resources for anyone that's interested. But the first thing that you can do is go to myidp.sciencecareers.org. And on that website, they have a career exploration tab. And this is really cool because you get to take a quiz, and that quiz will match a variety of different career paths with your personal attributes. And so I have my results pulled up here somewhere. And what I did was I took this quiz and I was able to assess what is valuable to me. And one thing that I really didn't like is day-to-day redundancy. So doing the same thing over and over from day to day. And I don't particularly like to write grants, even though I have, and it's been fun. But overall, I find that grant writing isn't for me. And so this website generated a whole list of various careers that match my personal my personal preferences. And what I did then is I took it upon myself to explore each of these career paths and figure out what exactly is necessary in order to get into them. And so, for instance, one of my highest matches was management consulting. And so, if you're unfamiliar with management consulting, what they do is a consultant will often go and meet with industry professionals and work with them to help solve various problems regarding their particular niche, whether it be pharmaceutical industry or something else like, say, a technology that an engineer is building and there's some sort of pipeline problem. And a consultant will go and help solve that problem with the individuals that work at the company. Now, in order to get into the top 5 firms, what I learned through informational interviews is that often the best thing to do is to go to a university or school that has a defined recruitment presence. And so one thing that I'll talk about a little bit later is that the institutions that you choose, whether for your PhD or your postdoc, have a variety of pros and cons. And one of them for the big, let's say like the Big 10 schools, included in that would be Harvard, Stanford, Yale, Princeton, UPenn maybe. They have a really large recruitment presence. And so recruiters from Bain or McKinsey or other big consulting firms go there in order to find their top talent. That's not to say top talent doesn't exist at all schools, but they still don't work off a meritocracy. They work off this antiquated, I want to go to the big name school system. And so that's one place where doing a postdoc could really help. Where, if you want to do a highly competitive industrial occupation like management consulting, then going to a school with really great exposure is something that is very valuable. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, so let me start by first defining a postdoc. This was a question that I got from the question and answer session that was in our story. So what is a postdoc? A postdoc is defined as an individual who has received their doctoral training already and is engaged in a temporary or defined period of mentoring. And so this is meant to enhance their professional skills and their independence needed to pursue their particular career path. And so what this means is that an individual in their PhD may have a varying amount of mentorship. I'm sure some of you on here right now or that will be watching later were very independent, and your mentor may not have held your hand, or maybe you wrote all of your own papers, but that experience is very variable. Some people are very independent and some people are not, and that's okay. As a student, you're meant to be learning, you're meant to be at different training levels, but as an employer, you're not sure, even, despite the letters of recommendation, you're not sure where that level of independence is. And so what a postdoc is meant to do is it's essentially an apprenticeship where, because you have your PhD, you are an independent scientist, but you're under the purview of a person that has established themselves as an individual capable of running a laboratory. And so while you're creating your own experiments, and for instance, I have a lot of autonomy in the lab of my mentor, but I get to learn some of the skills necessary for running a lab, writing grants, etc. And so that's really important in order for a future employer, whether it's an academic institution or industry, to understand whether or not you're capable of working autonomously. A little bit about postdoc numbers right now. In the United States, we have 65,000 postdocs, approximately year over year. And Harvard has 5,600 postdocs, Stanford has 2,300 postdocs, and the next highest is Johns Hopkins with around 1,500 postdocs. And so you could see that some schools, like some of the big schools, account for a very large number of postdocs. And beyond that, let's talk about demographics a little bit. So postdoc by gender, for instance, on the whole, about 55% of postdocs are female to 45% male. And then the mentor gender, this is one of these big things that I'm going to talk about, is over 60% of mentors of postdocs are male versus female. And so there's a huge gender gap in mentorship versus the number of actual postdocs, and this could affect experience. Even more skewed is the race and ethnicity status demographic. So, shoot. So less than 5% of postdocs right now are Hispanic, Black, or another underrepresented status. About 25% are, whoops, about 25% are Asian or international from the Asian, sub-Asian areas, and then a large swath of individuals are Caucasian. And as a result, this also may affect your experience, but what's interesting about postdocs is that you have an opportunity to build communities. And I'm going to talk about a little more about that as well. But what I want to do right now is debunk a few myths about postdocs that you may hear while you're in your PhD. One, you hear this all the time. Postdocs are only relevant if you want to pursue academia. Now, let's quickly revisit that number I talked about with PhDs. If around 55 to 60,000 PhDs are being trained every year, and in the US alone there are 64,000 postdocs. That means that when you're trying to get a job, and only 15% of postdocs get tenure track faculty positions. So when you're trying to get a job, you have a huge bottleneck. And as a PhD alone, you're competing with people that have gotten additional experience as a postdoc that are also looking for jobs after maybe 2 or 3 years of doing a postdoc. And so you'll increasingly find, and this is where kind of doing informational interviews and going on to LinkedIn, for instance, or Indeed.com and looking at the criteria for a job, you'll find that these jobs are looking for PhDs with 2 years of postdoc experience or with X number of postdoc experience. That is not a hard and fast rule, and I'm going to be able to give you some examples of individuals that did a really great job getting jobs without ever doing a postdoc. And they loved it. They were very happy with their decision, as well as individuals that did not do a postdoc, that did do a postdoc and are very happy as well. But keep in mind that as you start to look for jobs, you're competing with individuals that are also doing postdocs or currently have additional experience after their PhD. And so that's one consideration as you're trying to make this decision. The other myth that you often hear is that postdocs last forever. There's this term that people use that are called permadocs. And that means that you end up getting caught in a cycle where you're doing one postdoc, then maybe another postdoc, and 2 years turns into 4, turns into 6, and suddenly you're a career postdoc. That can honestly be the case. And so this gets back to the importance of being strategic. Going in, knowing what you want to accomplish with this postdoc, setting goals for yourself. What do I want 6 months in? What do I want 1 year, 2 years in? And then really working hard to meet those milestones so that you're cognizant of how much time you're spending. Now, there are exceptions to these rules. One quick example that I can give is a former colleague of mine recently interviewed with a Nobel laureate to do his postdoc. And what this person said, the potential mentor, said to my friend was, I can guarantee that you will get a tenure track faculty position, but you have to stay in my lab for 6 years. Within 6 years, you will have a tenure track faculty position, but that's the amount of time it takes for me to have you successfully run a project and properly advocate for your position at an academic institution for a tenure track faculty position. That's great if your goal is to do academia, because as I said earlier, only 15% of postdocs end up going into a tenure track faculty position. However, 6 years with the smaller amount of pay that postdocs get is a huge sacrifice. And honestly, it's a privilege to be able to make that sacrifice. There are a lot of people that are in scenarios, maybe they have dependents, maybe they have children or family that are relying on their income, or perhaps they themselves aren't in a place where they can afford, for instance, due to student loans, afford to be just putting off a higher salary for that amount of time. All of those are considerations. And so as you're making this decision to go into a postdoc, it's a highly personal decision. It may be that you are opting to forego a postdoc because you want to be able to make a higher income sooner, and that's perfectly acceptable. However, I will also talk about the opportunity cost of not doing a postdoc. And so that's something that I'll bring up as well. And then finally, one of the common misconceptions I think of postdocs is that they're often treated poorly or underappreciated by their academic institutions. This can often be an issue. I think it's more isolated to maybe the mentor that you choose than the actual academic institution treating you poorly. But that is rapidly changing, in large part because postdocs themselves are beginning to either unionize or advocate more effectively for themselves, thereby increasing their visibility. And with increased visibility, institutions increasingly are considering the postdoc experience. So a few things that are true about postdocs. One is, yes, they do often pay less than if you were to go into industry or into another career path directly. For instance, with academic postdocs, not industrial postdocs, on average they pay about 30% less than going into an industrial position. And 30%, that's nothing to scoff at. That's actually quite a bit of money, I agree. Two, your postdoc experience can vary depending on your mentor, your background. For instance, if you're a woman or an underrepresented minority, whether you're able-bodied or disabled, there are many factors that may influence your experience as a postdoc. And finally, depending on your personal career desire, an academic postdoc may not be right for you, and that's okay. And that's where doing a lot of informational interviews and talking with individuals that have successfully navigated the post-grad maze would be really useful. So make sure that you talk to individuals about this sort of thing. And so let's start talking about each of these things individually. So one, are postdocs only relevant if you want to pursue academia? The short answer is no. So there is an opportunity bias. I talked about this a little bit. Me having gone to Drexel University College of Medicine for my PhD, it's a great school. It's an R1 institution. The balance between your mentor and the number of students is great, so you get a really tight experience, meaning like the student-to-teacher ratio is good. And PhDs got to drive the publication process and their projects. And so I was very fortunate in being able to publish several first author papers because I was the one that was really the intellectual driver of my project, and that's great. However, there are drawbacks as well. When you're not at one of those really premier institutions or the big name institutions, I should say, what happens is that you have an opportunity bias in the number of recruiters and career opportunities available to you. And this can vary on a variety of things. It could be the institution. It could be your area. In particular, say, if you're in Boston, which is a major hub for life science, you have a lot of career opportunities. And so, for instance, we just had someone say that they're a PhD student from Paris. Hi there. Paris is a big city, and they have comparative, say, maybe to a more middle area of France or, say, southern France. In Paris, you have a lot more career opportunities than you might in a more rural area. And similarly, in the United States, you have more career opportunities in major cities like Manhattan or Boston or the Bay Area like San Francisco than you would, say, in the Midwest. But that's not to say that you don't have the opportunity to compensate for this later. And so this is where going to a big name institution for your postdoc can really help. You can have that intimate student experience during your PhD with the goal of really taking advantage of recruitment by postdocing at a bigger institution. And so this applies to not just doing academia or postdoc for the intention of going into academia in a tenure track faculty position, but rather also taking advantage of recruitment for the pharmaceutical industry. For instance, here at Stanford, Genentech is a huge employer of our postdocs, and it's a big company that pays very well. Management consulting, McKinsey, Bain, Accenture, they all come here to find PhDs and postdocs to bring into their management consulting track. Entrepreneurship and venture capital also hire from this area and from big name schools. So you can go into a postdoc with the sole goal of saying, I want to do a 1 to 2 year postdoc, but I'm really going to take advantage of the recruitment efforts that are made at this particular institution. That's one reason why doing a postdoc has advantages. Another is that it gives you an opportunity to network. These days, the majority of jobs, unfortunately, aren't landed due to meritocracy because there are so many applications, right? And you could be very, very qualified, but your application to a job gets lost in a huge stack in HR. And it's difficult to set yourself apart when no one's even able to read your application. And so by knowing people that have gone into these industries, you have a leg up because you can contact them and say, hey, I'm ready to move on to my full-time career. Do you know if your company has any opportunities available? And they may be able to put you in contact with a department or with a team that is hiring before they even advertise that position they're hiring for. And in this way, you get your application at the top of the pile with a good letter of recommendation. Now, how do you make that network? You could do it during your PhD, and you could try and go to career fairs, or you could go to, say, conferences and network that way. But another great opportunity is doing a postdoc and getting to know some of the senior postdocs. Because once you join that postdoctoral community, many of those individuals will be going on to their full-time careers. And then you have an expanded network of individuals doing science communication, doing industrial science, doing management consulting, and you now have direct contacts in those various industries so that you can better land a job rather than trying to do it directly out of a PhD. And so leveraging your network and building your network is very valuable during your postdoc, and it's one of the major time investments you can make as a postdoc. Now, there's another thing that I talked about, and that's that the experiences can vary based off your background, and I really wanted to make this point. When you're looking for mentorship, it's really valuable to have someone... Oh, my mom was calling, sorry. It's very valuable to have someone that's been through similar experiences as you have. And I just got a very great question. How can I find a postdoc in the United States? I'm going to talk about finding postdocs and finding various opportunities very soon. So hold on to that question. I'll be sure to address it. But depending on your background, let's say, for instance, if you're an international postdoc, it may be difficult to assimilate in the United States, to find a support system for your individual experiences. And what's great about a postdoc is that we have dedicated communities for a variety of different backgrounds. Here at Stanford, we not only have a postdoc association, but we have a Black postdoc association specific to underrepresented minorities. We have a Latinx postdoc association. We have a postdoc association for Asian international postdocs, a Chinese postdoc association. So you get to meet individuals that are from your particular affinity group or that you're comfortable with and build your network that way in a very specific manner. And in this way, you can also share your experiences because navigating science, for instance, or STEM fields or engineering as a woman or as an underrepresented minority is a very different experience than, say, someone like me who's a cis-het overrepresented male in STEM and has had a very different experience trying to navigate my postdoc than, say, someone in an underrepresented or different affinity group. And so being able to build your community is a wonderful way to, one, develop as an individual and as a scientist, but also to expand your network so that you're better prepared for your journey as an independent scientist. And someone just recently asked, how do I find a postdoc in the United States? That's a great question. One, start to go to international conferences and present your research. But when you present your research, you want to work on something called soft skills. And this is really, really important for landing a job. Again, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but that's okay. I want to make sure I answer all of your questions. By the way, everyone that's on right now, please just type in your questions. There are no bad questions. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, because that's really what this is all about. I could talk forever and ever about the statistics and numbers about postdocs and what you should do to get a job, but really I want to be able to answer specific questions from you, so make sure that you send those questions along. Okay, Amina, you asked, how can I get a postdoc in the United States? One, international conferences. When you go to these international conferences, be sure to visit various posters, not only of individuals that are students, but also try and identify seminars and faculty members that you would really like to postdoc with, and seek them out, because a face-to-face personal interaction is a lot more effective than a cold email to a variety of labs. The other thing, too, that will help increase your hit rate for competitive postdocs, say in big-name labs, is to have specific questions or references to their work. Every scientist, I think, likes to feel important and also likes to occasionally have their ego stroked. And so when you're reaching out to these individuals, you can say, you know, your recent publication on X really caught my eye, and I do research in Y. And here's why I think your mentorship would benefit me and how I could benefit your lab. Because demonstrating that you are valuable to them is really what they're interested in. How can you help them win a new grant? How can you help further their research? What particular skill set do you have that can really serve their interests? And then from there, also discuss how you're interested in gaining independent support. So you may already have a grant that can help pay and subsidize the cost that your cost burden to them, but also showing that you intend to put in a grant will show that you are considerate of the cost of bringing in new individuals, and that you have the foresight to be looking for independent funding, so that you can then go on to be less of a cost burden and more of a contributor to that individual lab. So I just got another great question. Is it easy to work in different fields in a postdoc? So I've been predominantly talking about life science. What's really great about doing a postdoc in other fields, say computer science for instance, is that your market value as a computer scientist is actually a little bit higher than a life scientist, because so many life science PhDs are trained every year. Life science are things like molecular biology, cancer biology, neuroscience, and so on and so forth. The advantage of being a computer scientist is that a lot of computer scientists end up going straight into industry. And so as a postdoc in computer science, you actually on average get paid around $70,000 to $75,000 versus the $48,000 you get paid as a life scientist. And so, yeah, it is actually the ease of doing a postdoc is to some degree field dependent. Now, caveat, if you're doing a postdoc in computer science, it's predominantly male individuals that are doing postdocs. So as a woman in computer science or computer engineering, you may feel more of like gender disparity, for instance, because you don't have as many female contemporaries or peers that you can work with, and so the experience is a little different. In life science, 55% of postdocs are women, and so suppose I'm a physics background and doing biophysics, doing more biology. Yeah, you could absolutely do a biology postdoc as a physics background. In fact, it's encouraged to pursue a postdoc that will help expand your technical skill set. And so one strategy is to continue on to exactly what you do for your postdoc. This may help you get a publication faster. But really, when employers are looking for an individual, they want to see someone with a breadth of knowledge that is able to do not only molecular biology and, say, CRISPR, but also maybe electrophysiology. And that's a powerful skill set, because then you can use CRISPR to knock out a particular protein of interest, and then also have the skill set to do molecular level research, but systems level research as well. And so being able to expand your technical skill set and really work on a variety of different problems from a variety of different angles is hugely important, not only to an academic career path, but also to other career paths as well. It shows versatility, which is very good. Now, I was talking about soft skills. As a PhD, and as someone that's going on to a postdoc, you'll find that you are amongst individuals that are highly accomplished. By the time that you end up doing your postdoc, you'll have individuals that have published in Cell and Nature and Science, other people that have multiple first author publications. Everyone is a highly accomplished and very well accomplished individual. So how do you set yourself apart? And this is where soft skills come in. Soft skills are things like being able to present well, being able to do public speaking, leading a team, being able to collaborate, critical thinking, creativity. Those are things that aren't very quantifiable, right? Like impact factor and number of first author publications is a quantifiable metric. But the ability to work in a team, to be able to talk in front of a large group of people with clarity and distinction, those are skills that are very worthwhile. Because when you're in job interviews, whether it's a postdoc interview or a job interview when you're circumventing a postdoc, that's what sets you apart. Everyone else may have great CV metrics, but to be able to make an impression is very important. And so how is it that you can do this? Well, for one, as a PhD, take on leadership roles. Make sure that when you're doing your PhD or postdoc, that you're putting yourself in scenarios where you have to interact with others and you're able to develop out your ability to speak in public and to communicate your particular ideas, and the way that you are able to work on a team is effective because you are putting yourself in a position where you have many opportunities to work with a diversity of personalities. And that's where something like being the chair of your graduate student association or working with faculty members to create various seminars comes in, because you get to learn the skills necessary to work in a team. And that's really a major contingent in the hiring process. So be sure to seek out opportunities. And again, if you haven't had the time to do this yet and you're about to graduate, this is another area where doing a postdoc is very valuable, because as you move on to that next stage and you're doing a postdoc, you'll be able to meet a variety of individuals from different fields, just like in your PhD. But there are also opportunities to, say, do a grant writing clinic or to work with the Postdoc Association to advocate for postdocs. And so as you do these sorts of things, you meet various people that can then help you as you progress in your career. And so soft skills are very important for landing jobs, whether you're doing a postdoc or not. Now, I've talked a lot about the pros of postdocs, but I think I need to talk a little bit about the opportunities that exist outside of doing a postdoc. Now, one thing that is very common when you're talking with individuals from industry is that PhD students and postdocs that have predominantly focused on the academic path, right? They've done wet lab work and they are mostly just focused maybe for some period of time on pursuing a job in academia, is that they're ill prepared for their role as an industrial scientist. Now, when I talk about industry, I'm talking about large companies that are working towards a mission or goal. So, for instance, the pharmaceutical industry. They want to improve healthcare by finding new lead compounds or various products that can help treat maladies or diseases, right? So they have a very particular focus. And what this means is that, unlike academia, when you're part of an industrial team, whether as a postdoc or an employee as, like, say, a full-fledged scientist, you're often not the one that's setting those goals. That's coming from senior management. But what your job is as an industrial scientist or postdoc is figuring out the best way to meet the goals that are set by senior management. So let's say, just as an example, your mission is to find a new therapy for Alzheimer's disease that will help with cognition. Those compounds that you're identifying may be what you are focused on. However, the strategy and the ability for you to be able to treat Alzheimer's disease, the amount of funding that is dedicated to your particular program, all of that is set by senior management. And so a lot of that intellectual creativity may not be exactly parallel to what you're doing in academia. So this is just a roundabout way of saying that the skill set that you need to be a successful industrial scientist is probably better learned through doing a postdoc in industry than through doing an academic postdoc. In fact, this is why a lot of companies like Genentech and AstraZeneca and Pfizer have all created specific tracks for postdocs, postdoc positions, because they can impress upon these individuals what is necessary to become a successful industrial scientist versus doing academia. And so one alternative option for an academic career path is doing an industrial postdoc. And there are a few other things as well. For instance, a really great career track, if you're interested in transforming the field of science, especially in the United States, because that's what I'm familiar with, there are a bunch of different policy fellowships that you can work with. One is called the AAAS Policy Fellowship, where now you are, after your PhD, working with congresspeople and academic institutions at an administrative level to create new science policy that will make the whole academic and industrial process of science, that pipeline that leads to better healthcare, more efficient. There's the Presidential Management Fellowship. That's through NIH. And this is where you can learn to become an administrator or leader in a variety of the institutes that are part of the National Institutes of Health. So it may be NINDS or NIMH, which is the National Institutes of Mental Health. And you can work as a program officer or someone that lobbies to Capitol Hill. These are all different career tracks that do not require the traditional postdoc, that, depending on what you want to do, can be a much better opportunity than, say, doing the traditional academic postdoc. And so there are a variety of resources that are also available. One of the best places to start, for those just joining or that weren't here earlier, is myidp.sciencecareers.org. This is where you can not only set your own personal goals, but also take a personalized quiz that will allow you to match various career paths, whether it's science communication or science policy or management consulting or academia, to your personality. And so based off your personality, you'll be able to figure out exactly what career paths match best for you, and then they provide a bunch of different resources on how to get that particular career or land that job for yourself. So I told you that I was going to give you a few examples of individuals that did not do postdocs that succeeded. One is a friend of mine who chose to forego a postdoc and instead worked with a recruiter to land a scientist position at a really great company. I'm not going to say his name, but he was a biomedical engineer graduate, and he ended up brushing up his CV, working with his career office to make sure that his credentials looked very good. And within 8 months of graduating with his PhD, he landed a scientist job. Now, working with a recruiter is a double-edged sword. One, they know of many opportunities, but often they will charge a finder's fee. And so they may say, for X amount of years, you're going to pay a percentage of your salary to us for matching you with this opportunity. Or they'll say, I want you to pay an upfront cost of X in order to work with me and find you a job or match you with a job. Alternatively, you may find a recruiter that's willing to work with you for free because they're actually being paid by the company itself. And so they don't cost anything to you, but in fact, they're able to help you find a job. Now, again, it depends on who you're working with. Often recruiters will prefer to work with postdocs because they have a little bit more experience. But again, I've had friends that were able to get an industrial position, no problem, lickety-split, by working with recruiters. Now, I had mentioned that depending on the academic institution you're at, you may have different opportunities. So another person that I'm familiar with was a PhD student at MIT and then got a job working for a venture capital firm and is doing a lot of their marketing research and marketing work for this venture capital firm. This is certainly an option, especially if you have at your particular institution a large recruiter presence. But one thing you can do as a PhD is you could start to try and build, maybe with your program or with the career office, more relationships with industries that you're interested in. And so work with your career office, if you have one, to try and find potential strategic partners. At Drexel, we tried to make partnerships with GlaxoSmithKline, which is located in Philadelphia. And through that process, there is now a pharmaceutical-minded career track for PhDs and master's students that puts them in internships and rotation opportunities with industry. So by the time that they're graduating as a PhD, they can go straight into industry rather than having to do a postdoc. And so the advantage of doing something like this is that there is a salary discrepancy. As I said, when you go into industry, you're making about 30% more than the average postdoc. And what this means is that over time, that wage disparity compounds. So for every additional year that you're working as an industrial science, let's assume there's a 5% raise. So you get that 5% raise over your initial salary, and suddenly the opportunity cost of doing a postdoc can seem very large because you're missing out on 30% of that salary growth over time. Now, the caveat of that particular example is this, and that's that if you do a postdoc, your average starting salary is higher. And so it's about $90,000 as a PhD life scientist getting a job straight out of a PhD versus $120,000 having done a postdoc. So if you assume that there's a 5% raise year over year, after 10 years, I think I ran the numbers actually, after 10 years of a 5% raise, and if you started at $95,000, you'll be making $154,000 American dollars as a PhD that went directly into a job. But if you did 2 years of a postdoc and then had a 5% year-over-year raise, you make $195,000. And so suddenly that wage gap has shrunk quite a bit because the qualifications and the skill sets that you get from doing a postdoc make you a potentially more attractive individual for an industrial position, and therefore you have a higher starting salary. And so that power of compounding is more powerful over time. This also brings me back to another soft skill that is very important, and that is negotiation. So I had mentioned that on average, computer science majors make $75,000, computer science postdocs make about $70,000 per year versus the approximately $50,000 that life science PhDs make. However, at my institution, for instance, we have a minimum salary of $60,000 for postdocs, and that's just the minimum. So every postdoc coming in has the ability to negotiate their salary. So if you're coming in with a grant, for instance, that professor is not having to pay some amount of money. You're subsidizing some of your cost burden by having a grant. And so what that means is that you're now in a position where you can negotiate with the individual and say, hey, because I'm bringing some grant money in, is it possible for my annual salary to be $65,000 or $70,000 instead of the $60,000? Because part of that salary I'm paying on my own. Now, of course, you could bring this up as an option. Negotiations are, there's a disparity in negotiation depending on your background. Interpretations of a woman trying to negotiate may be different than a man, same with an underrepresented minority. That's always something to consider. However, if you're in a position where you're able to negotiate, you could actually raise that postdoc salary. So the opportunity cost that you're actually realizing is much smaller because you're now starting your postdoc with a higher salary than you would have been otherwise. So keep in mind that negotiation is another soft skill, whether for your postdoc or for a full-time position, that you should make sure that you're doing and that you're well-versed in. Negotiation's a great thing to do. But that being said, I think it's very valuable for you as a graduating PhD to understand exactly what track is best for not only your personality, but also best for your particular career path. I think for something like science policy, there are much better fellowship opportunities than doing a pure academic postdoc. That being said, you do have the opportunity to try and get into some science policy being a postdoc, but then you also have the burden of doing the research for your mentor. And so the amount of time that you have to dedicate to a lot of personal exploration and career exploration may not be as much. It's just something to consider. Some other cons to doing a postdoc, as I had mentioned, if you are not the type of individual that really wants to do the traditional academic route, say writing grants, writing publications, there's always going to be some expectation that you're performing to that academic capacity as a postdoc at an academic institution. You know, I am very lucky in that my mentor is very entrepreneurial minded, and so he's not only succeeding in the academic realm, but he's also constantly thinking like, hey, can I start a company? Can I patent this idea? And that's very valuable for me because I get some exposure to entrepreneurship and to intellectual property and tech transfer, these sorts of things. But I am still 100% expected to perform in the laboratory, to be able to write grants, to be able to, in a timely manner, complete my experiments and to write my publication. And that's not what everyone wants to do. So, for instance, in industry, even though you still publish, the priority is not to publish. The priority is to move your particular compound through the pipeline and get key metrics that show the efficacy of whatever it is you're trying to prove or disprove. And so your priorities are different. And so matching your particular interests to the priorities of a particular opportunity is essential. The only way that you'll know if a postdoc is right for you is to understand exactly what it is you want and what you want to get out of your particular experience. And this is where strategic planning comes into play. Make sure that as you are moving forward, you can say with precision what it is you want to accomplish in 6 months, in 1 year, in 2 years. What is it that you want to get out of your PhD experience, your postdoc experience, and are you meeting those milestones? If you're not, then it's time to consider, what do I need to do in order to meet those milestones? Maybe it's, you know what, I made a mistake, an academic postdoc was not the correct path for me, let me look into other paths. But during that time, your academic postdoc can be a buffer where you're now having that opportunity for self-discovery. Okay, great. So we have a couple questions. How do you balance between entrepreneurship and postdoc life? And also, are there pros and cons to doing a traditional postdoc versus a focused on science policy or tech transfer? Both great questions. 1, how do you balance entrepreneurship and postdoc life? One thing that I am doing right now is I'm starting a company. And so I have the opportunity to both do my postdoc and also get the experience of the startup life, going and talking with potential investors, doing pitch competitions. And that does take some discipline and a careful balance between entrepreneurship and postdoc life. The way that I do it is, 1, clear communication with my mentor. And so there is a common trend, and I was notoriously bad at this, where I overpromise. I'll get very excited and say, you know, I have this much time on my hands, but you know what, I think that I can do this. So when I meet with my mentor, I'll say, oh yeah, I'll have that data to you in 3 days. Or, oh, you know, I'll have a draft of this paper to you by next week. And then you realize that there aren't enough hours in the day to really meet that goal. And you're being like, best case scenario, if everything goes right and I'm able to spend every hour every day on this, I'll be able to give you 3 weeks, or give you that draft in 3 weeks, right? The key to being able to balance, say, something like entrepreneurship or your extracurriculars and academic is managing expectations. So now when I talk to my mentor, I'll say, I'll determine in my mind what is the realistic scenario and then add, say, a week to that timeline. So instead of saying I'll get it to you next week, I'll say I should have everything analyzed in a draft in your inbox in 2.5 weeks. And then I have the ability to build into that extra time that I've given myself the opportunity to go and do entrepreneurship activities, to work on my company. And also what I'm able to do there is I can talk to my boss and say, it'll be 2 weeks till I get you the paper. Also, on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'll be leaving early in order to go to an entrepreneurship clinic or to do a pitch competition. The other thing that I did is that I actually brought my boss in as a board member and a scientific consultant. And so now that he has a vested interest in the success of my company because he's included as the team member, he's more understanding of the time that I take to spend on the company, because my success as an entrepreneur means his success as a board member of the company or a stakeholder in that company. And so the key to balancing these two things is to, one, manage expectations of both your own expectations and the expectations of your mentor, but two, also try and identify that, or try and bring that person in as a stakeholder so that then they're able to appreciate the value of the time that you're putting into your company. Now, we had another question that was, are there pros and cons to doing traditional postdocs versus a focused one? And are these independent of each other, or are science, policy, tech transfer duties performed in addition to your research? So it depends on the program. If you do something like the AAAS Science Policy Fellowship, there is very little wet lab time that you're doing. In fact, that is solely rotations in various roles as a science policy expert, and you get the opportunity to really dive into that world. And you are actually foregoing the traditional academic postdoc. So in that case, it's independent. Something like tech transfer is different. So at Stanford, for instance, or Drexel, UPenn, you have the ability to work with the tech transfer office while doing your PhD or postdoc. So then you get to see what it's like to deal with intellectual property, to try and license technology to industry while doing your PhD or postdoc. Now, this is where the duties that you're performing are in addition to your research. And so it's really important in those scenarios to do what I described earlier, to manage expectations, to really plan carefully, and to use your time efficiently. So depending on what you're trying to pursue, that's what we're talking about. Also, by the way, everyone, I created a spreadsheet of the different fellowship opportunities that exist, both traditional postdocs and non-traditional postdocs. And I want to share that with the community, and it's going to be open, and you'll have the ability to edit those entries. And so if I've missed something, say for instance international opportunities, anyone can add those in. So then we can build like a running list of various opportunities for PhDs or other individuals to reference as they're making these big decisions. And so again, for everyone that just joined or that is interested in participating, please send your questions, and I'm happy to answer any of these questions. And also, I want to quickly give you my email address. It's Anand, A-N-A-N-D, Rao, R-A-O, at stanford.edu. So if you don't want to ask any questions here, feel free to email me, and we can start a conversation via email about how best to move forward. And also, as opportunities, if you email me, as opportunities come up, I may be able to forward them to you so that then you have some ideas of what is available in the Bay Area or California, for instance. And so I'm happy to do that. I just want to be as much of a help as possible. Now, a few resources that I think would be useful for individuals from underrepresented minorities. Now, I talk about this because science is one where there's a huge disparity. White males dominate the faculty pool. They make up basically almost all of the faculty members in life science are white males. The number of female faculty is increasing, but it's still majorly disproportionate to the number of female trainees and postdocs. In fact, there are multiple studies that show that women are more likely to drop out of the academic track than men are. And it's even worse for underrepresented minorities, for, say, the Latinx community or Black community. And the reason I bring this up is because an individual's success is largely dependent on their ability to have good mentorship. And the experiences of an individual are highly personal, right? And so having someone that shares those experiences, for instance, if you're part of the LGBTQ community, or if you're an underrepresented minority, or if you're disabled, your experiences as a scientist are very different than they would be for me as an overrepresented male in science. So identifying mentors that can help you through this process is very important. And so doing a postdoc is one great way to be able to meet community members that that share your same affinity group. Stanford has over 2,300 postdocs, and even though a small minority of those individuals are underrepresented, they still have created a community that can help foster your development as a scientist as an underrepresented minority in the STEM fields. We also have most cities and most universities in the United States have something called AWIS, which is the Women in Science community. And so what that does is it puts female scientists together to talk about their experiences and to help one another. And they have a whole network of individuals that are established scientists in academia, in industry, that will be able to help you navigate, say, for instance, the negotiation process, or how to network at conferences. Because networking as someone that's underrepresented in science is very different than, say, someone like me that's an Indian male or that's a white male in science, because we're overrepresented and sometimes we could dominate the conversation, and that's not good. So it's very important to seek out mentorship that can really facilitate your development. And one great resource is www.minoritypostdoc.org. And what this does is it lays out all of the fellowship opportunities, career opportunities, conferences that are specific to individuals that may be a minority in science, underrepresented due to their ethnicity or due to their gender, and it allows them to connect in an inclusive environment and in a very diverse environment that will then help them succeed. And that's something I wanted to give a shout out to. And so that basically covers most of what I wanted to talk about regarding the pros and cons, but I want to give a couple minutes to anyone that's watching right now or that may have joined late to ask any questions regarding the postdoc experience. What are your major concerns? Do you want to know how to choose a laboratory? That's something I could talk about. But go ahead and, as I'm talking about choosing a lab and mentor, discuss or think of some questions that you may want me to answer, and I'd be happy to answer them. So quickly, how do you choose a mentor? There are traditionally two debates that people have. Should I choose a newly minted mentor, for instance, someone that is young and still working at the bench, or should I pick a seasoned veteran mentor that is kind of a luminary in their field, has a long track of publication and winning grants? And this is a really important question. I chose to go with a relatively new mentor. This is a young guy. He's an MD, PhD anesthesiologist here at Stanford, very well known as he's an up-and-coming in bioenergetics and in mitochondria, both in neurons and non-neuronal cells like astrocytes and microglia. But he had just gotten his first R01 as I was coming in, and I was his first postdoc. So why did I choose this? Well, one, I had already identified that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, or that I was very interested in entrepreneurship. And when I came into this particular opportunity, I wanted to go into venture capital, which is the industry where you invest in startup companies and you're working with scientists in order to build companies and grow them into something that later is very big. So knowing that, I used that information to inform where I would go. One, young mentors tend to be a bit more or a bit less dogmatic when it comes to career paths. And so my mentor was more open to entrepreneurship and me splitting my time between the traditional academic pursuit and also learning more about the process of becoming an entrepreneur, starting a company, so on and so forth. And like I said, he also had similar aspirations. He wants to patent his discoveries, he wants to start companies, and that was in line with my own value system. If you want to go into academia, it may be better to find an established mentor. Here's why. When I applied for my F-32 grant, one of the biggest criticisms, they loved the science, they loved me as a candidate, but they were concerned that because my mentor was so young and he was only just starting the research process, that because the F-32 is a training grant, the quality of the training that he would provide me would not be the same as it would have been for someone else. And so it looks like in about 20 seconds, this live session is going to stop, and then I'm just going to have to restart the live session. So don't worry if I cut out. And so when you're making that decision, pick based off what you want to do, whether a senior mentor or junior mentor is the way to go. Just one second. And we're back. All right, I'll wait for some of you to rejoin, and then I'll start talking again. Hi. All right, let's get back to it. So I was talking about choosing between a young mentor or like a relatively new PI versus a more senior PI. So if you're writing grants with like the major funding agencies, then what you find is that having a more seasoned mentor is an advantage, because the individuals that are judging this criteria, like the people that sit on study sections are the groups that review grants, they generally know who the investigators are that you're working with. And as much as we would love for grants to be based purely off science, there's a lot of camaraderie that exists amongst the scientific community. And so knowing that someone is a good mentor because they've been in the field for, say, 20 years, they have a track record of getting grants, they are more likely to be ranked higher as a potential mentor than a new investigator that is still relatively unknown in their field. Another thing is that you can actually compensate for that by finding a senior mentor and bringing them in as a co-mentor or collaborator on your grant. And so by doing that, you recognize that the individual that is your direct mentor may be still a bit junior, and so you're bringing in more senior mentors to help you go down a mentorship path that is more appropriate for the grant that you're applying for. But again, it's highly personal whether or not you should work with a junior investigator, a relatively new mentor, or a more senior mentor. But in general, I found that the junior mentors tend to be more hands-on. They tend to be spending more time in the laboratory because they have a smaller operation. And they're also more understanding if you want to split time between your academic research and, say, something like science communication or entrepreneurship like me. You can explore different pursuits while still doing your academic research, and a junior mentor may be a bit more understandable or understanding of that than, say, someone that has been in academia for 30 years who had a very different hiring and employment landscape than you have as an individual going in. There was also a question about generally what is the ideal amount of time to stay in your postdoc. Again, this really depends on what it is you want to accomplish. I think these days, the average before landing a tenure-track faculty position, the average years of postdoc is 4. So you generally are doing a postdoc for around 3 to 4 years before successfully landing a job as a tenure-track faculty position. That being said, I was very lucky in that one of my former mentors recommended me for an academic position, and I interviewed for that position at an R1 institution that's part of the Big Ten, and I got an offer for the job. I ended up turning it down because I have other job prospects that I'll likely be pursuing, but it was great, and I had only been a postdoc for a year and a half at the time, and so it is possible to get a job sooner, especially if you've shown that you're capable of winning grants both in your PhD and your postdoc, and you have a pretty good track record of publication. These days, I think academic institutions would like to bring the average age of their new hires down a bit, and so that may be changing. But if you want to do something like join a biotech company or startup or join industry, then the 4-year postdoc suddenly becomes around 1 to 2 years, because now with that postdoc experience, you've had enough time to really brush up on your CV. Maybe you're finishing your dissertation or the final publications of your PhD, and then you can just start burning out applications to various jobs, working with different career offices. Maybe you use that piece of advice that I gave earlier that is going to a big institution that gets a lot of recruiters. But by doing that, you suddenly now have the ability to exit your postdoc and enter your long-term career path much more quickly than, say, if you wanted to do academia. And so depending on what you want to do really determines how long your postdoc will be. But there is no hard and fast rule. Is there an advantage to do a postdoc if you want to work in industry, not academia? No, you didn't miss it. I talked about it a little bit, but I'll go over it again because it's an important question. The short answer is it depends. If the industry that you want to go into, say if you want to work for Genentech, then one of the best things that you could do is join Genentech's postdoc positions. They have their own postdocs. They're great. They pay better than academic postdocs do, and they have really good benefits as well. I think that at Genentech you have, like, for instance, childcare allowances or more support for dependents. You also have a potential retirement contribution plan. But one thing that you don't have as an industrial postdoc is that you are now in a particular track at that company. You don't have the same number of options as you would as an academic postdoc. So an opportunity for me as an academic postdoc is I could apply to the big companies like Genentech or AstraZeneca or Takeda, etc. But I could also apply for small startups. I could apply for other jobs. You could do that as an industrial postdoc as well. But generally, the company that you're working for views you as a person in the pipeline that will then join that particular company. And so it may not look great if you're applying to their competitors' jobs while doing a postdoc with that particular company. Now, that being said, it really is manager dependent, but depending on, I think that there's a bit more freedom in where you apply if you're doing an academic postdoc versus an industrial postdoc. That being said, again, doing an industrial postdoc teaches you industry-specific skills that make you more effective in that particular career path than, say, doing an academic postdoc. But in general, I think that there are a lot of opportunities both within academia, stemming from an academic postdoc, but also there are opportunities that you may benefit from. It's very dependent. I think that this is a great area to explore further. There are resources and papers that I'll post about the addictive brain that they can then share with anyone that's interested. So either email them or me. Again, my email address is anandrao@stanford.edu. You could find me on the Addictive Brain website also. Shoot me a message and I'd be happy to send you various resources or discuss these things further. But I've actually been talking for over an hour now, so unless there are any other questions, I will end this live chat, and I look forward to anyone that's interested in learning more emailing me or shooting me a message on Instagram, and I'm happy to send you as many resources as you'd like and discuss various things further. Some companies state at the outset that they don't always hire their own industry-trained postdocs. Do you know why this is? Yeah, so they, just like anyone else, want to hire the best talent possible. And so when I say that, that's not to say that those industry-trained postdocs are not fantastic for the positions that they're being trained for. It's just that every team may have a different need. And so as these companies are training their postdocs, they're training them with a specific skill set, but they don't want to be locked into hiring every one of those individuals, especially if they find someone from elsewhere, maybe jumping from a different company or coming out of an academic postdoc that better fits what they need at that time. And so kind of as almost a legal disclaimer, they say that they don't always hire their own postdocs because they don't want to be on the hook to hire everyone that they're training if they don't have a need for that particular individual at the time. So that's why they say those types of things. And I think generally the percentage is very good. So I'm thinking of Genentech. They hire over 70% of their Genentech trained postdocs for full-time positions. And Genentech pays very, very well. I think landing the postdocs can be pretty competitive, but that's okay. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So if you want to do industry, I would say apply to it if it meets your needs. And hopefully it's something that you can end up landing, because then you have a very high probability of joining the company, which is in California. It pays very well. It's a great place to be. Two is that there are programs specific to individuals that have unique circumstances. For instance, if you are a first generation graduate student or college attendee, or if you're coming from low income status, your path can be a lot more difficult, in that, when you're doing a postdoc, you have to, one, sacrifice a higher salary. You need to be able to pay your down payment and your first month's rent on a house, for instance. That can be difficult. But what programs are doing now for postdocs and even for graduate students is they're making specific tracks. There's a really great program in Philadelphia with the University of Pennsylvania called Pennport. And Pennport has a dedicated pool of money for FGLI, that's first generation low income individuals, or people from underrepresented minorities, to join as a postdoc at UPenn. And then they match you with particular teaching opportunities. And over 90% of the people that are part of the Pennport program go on to get professorships or teaching university positions as a professor after 2 to 4 years. So it's a great program that has a really high success rate if you're interested in going into academia, especially if you're interested in teaching. And there are a whole bunch of different fellowships like this. Stanford has one called PRISM that pays for individuals to come out and interview here at Stanford for postdoc positions. They arrange meetings with various professors and then help you get to know the community, the postdoc community here at Stanford. And so if you are interested in doing a postdoc, make sure that you look at the various program options about 1 year or 6 months before you're ready to graduate, so that then you can start to consider all of the different ways that you can get to where you want to be in your career. And so with that, if there are no other questions, feel free to message me. ANRao7 is my Instagram handle, or anandrao@stanford.edu is my email address. And feel free to contact me if you want any sort of career advice or information regarding postdocs or not doing a postdoc or anywhere in between.